Getting straight into it now, digital ID. So, happened recently, Sky News is ones that broke the news on this, as we'll go through in a moment, and then we've got footage from Keir Starmer as well. This is what Sky News announced 2 days ago. It's coming to you from the X page, but it's digital ID to be made law mandatory for all adults in the UK to tackle the small boats. Coming on screen now.
Breaking news now. Digital ID will be made law for all adults in an effort to tackle small boats. Downing Street believes that a mandatory ID card system will help stop illegal immigrants working. Let's bring in our political correspondent, Mari Aurora. Mari, what more do we know about this?
Yeah, well, Gareth, this is interesting because this is something that has been spoken about a lot. Tony Blair, for instance, has been talking about this for years and years as what he always believed was one of the best ways to try and reduce illegal immigration and the ability for people to work illegally here in the UK. But Sky News understands that we will have an announcement, could be as soon as tomorrow, from the Prime Minister on these mandatory ID cards, an ID card system, the Brit card. And essentially what this will mean, it will be mandatory for all adults here in the UK. It will make it easier for employers and for landlords to make sure that those they are employing or renting or to actually have the right legal immigration status here in the UK. They can do it.
And I think it'll also be very suspiciously easy for employers to work out what your political views are based on your social credit score and all the rest of it. Tony Blair, the brainchild behind diversity and the one that said we needed to rub the right's nose in diversity, all of this stuff, right? Of course, this is his brainchild. He tried to bring this in during the first sort of Labour administration. I'm not sure if it was the end of his administration or if it was during Brown's administration, but it was in 2006, 2007, sometime around that time. They tried to bring in stricter ID laws and all the rest of it. So this is furthering the descent into modern-day communist totalitarian systems, right? You're easily seeing now how they're paving the way for a system like China, right? That's what they're paving the way for. They're telling you it's to tackle the small boats. They're telling you it's because it's going to be so easy to tell people's immigration status, right? You know, they're probably just going to sweep everybody that's coming here illegally. They'll just sweep them in and say, yep, it's all fine. You've got your Brit card now. You're here legally. We can just doctor it to say whatever we want. And we know that the government is not above doctoring figures and making things fit their narrative now, are they? Oh, I thought my dog had grabbed my slipper then, but no, she's just grabbed her... As you can hear, she just grabbed her little squeaky giraffe. So my dog's having a whale of a time at the moment. Me too. Say hi. Anyway. So you see now, this is going to be linked to your employment status. It's going to be linked to your NHS stuff. It's going to be linked to just your transportation. It's going to be linked. There's going to be gates everywhere with facial ID and scanning your Brit card or whatever in order to even say that you can go anywhere and the government can turn it off at the flick of a switch. Truly Orwellian times that we live in, ladies and gentlemen. And even our friends, the Yanks across the pond, Ron DeSantis, observed that on X, commenting on it, saying very 1984 totalitarian-esque. But just so you can hear it from the man himself, right, our dear leader, Mr. Keir Starmer, our dear leader, Tutia Queer, here is him speaking on GB News at the 2025 Global something action, global program action, I believe it is, or global progress action. Everything global. Nothing for the people of Britain, right? Nothing for Britain in terms of and its national sovereignty, right? Everything has to be global, and that's obviously cuts to the root of the problem.
And that is why today I am announcing this government will make a new free-of-charge digital ID mandatory for the right to work by the end of this Parliament. Let me spell that out. You will not be able to work in the United Kingdom if you do not have digital ID. It's as simple as that. Because decent, pragmatic, fair-minded people, they want us to tackle the issues that they see around them. And of course, the truth is, we won't solve our problems if we don't also take on the root causes, looking upstream to tackle poverty, conflict. And that is why...
So, ladies and gentlemen, you might have just seen a big jump cut there because I talked for about 10 minutes and not realising that my microphone was on mute. So, I'm going to have to paraphrase what I said. unfortunately. So what you heard there, ladies and gentlemen, is designed to tackle the issues of today. It's designed to tackle the small boats. It's designed to tackle poverty, all of these things. And we all know it's a great big giant fucking lie, right? These people in government, Keir Starmer, get his marching orders from the World Economic Forum, and he's basically Blair's puppet, and Blair always gets the marching orders from whoever's leading the World Economic Forum at this time, Klaus Schwab, and they're all in bed together with the UN and the EU then and all the rest of them, right? They have no incentive to help us. They have no incentive to do it. They could do it if they wanted to, because they could change government policy, right? They could change government policy to what people of this nation actually want, for the most part, right? They want the quote-unquote asylum seekers gone. They want the foreign army gone, right? They want our streets to be safe. They don't want their kids being snatched off the street by foreigners, right? They could change this overnight if they wanted to. But no, everything that they have to bring in has to look like it's going to help. But it's a bit like, again, somebody gives you something with one hand and they take with another, right? A Faustian bargain, if you will. But the thing is, you're not really getting anything out of it. You're just getting more surveillance, you're getting less freedom, and less safety, ironically. Less safety. They're doing everything they can to make you more and more unsafe anyway, because they'll just have you go along with it. They'll use democracy to get rid of democracy by bringing in this foreign voting bloc to the tunes of millions. And if you don't believe me, we'll go over something which the Plaid Cymru MSs are saying in Parliament, right? And a lot of the other MSs are saying in Parliament, where they would happily bring millions, tens of millions to this country, right? Because it's a massive foreign voting bloc under the guise of empathy and care. And because I dared to criticise the globalist nation of sanctuary baby, right? Because I dared to criticise that, I got called a dog. I got called a dog by a Plaid Cymru AS. Your elected representatives, ladies and gentlemen, he's not from my constituency. He's not from my constituency, admittedly. But calling the Welsh people that they are meant to represent because they don't agree with their policies, and they'll call them out and mock them for it, they'll call them dogs. They'll liken you to dogs. They don't even see you as human. So that tells you a lot about the mindset of these people. All right? I'll go over that at the end of the show. You can either skip to the chapters and go over that a little bit later, or you can wait and stay tuned for the end of the show. So, if the government wanted to solve it, they could. But no, they want more control. They want more surveillance, right? To a terrifying extent. They want to make us more like China. Klaus Schwab says China is the blueprint, right? And they're the ones giving us our marching orders, essentially. So, they mentioned Blair, right? Blair, who said the one, we got to rub the right's nose in diversity, right? We got to go to war and destroy the forces of conservatism, which we talked about before, right? It was waging war on the very fabric of British society, right? The very values and principles and people that joined this nation together. That's what he went to war with. The greatest divider that we've ever had, in many ways. Now, the problem was building successively before that point, right? You know? The Windrush generation that I think it was Harold Wilson was Harold Wilson, I believe it was prime minister at the time, and said, was on the verge of turning the boat around and sending it back to wherever it was coming from, and sending it over to, I think it was Jamaica. He's going to send the boat back to, because people were so unhappy about it. People have been happy about the extent of Pakistani immigration. People have been very unhappy about the extent of African immigration, right? Because of the problems that it's led to. Right? You look at a lot of the countries in Africa and all across the Middle East, we don't want our countries looking like that. We were perfectly happy with the way our countries were, with the way our countries were. But the right nose had to be rubbed in diversity, right, and multiculturalism. And this is where we now are today. Now, the problem is, ladies and gentlemen, is that, again, they're realising people are cottoning onto it, so they're now having to try and cut off everybody's avenues of escape, or avenues of combating them, right? And that's what this digital surveillance prison state, what they want to build, is, right? Not to mention the Fabians that are running the country absolutely love Islam and love Mohammed. George Bernard Shaw was writing in a newspaper back in the early to mid. I think it was in the early 20th century. I can't remember the newspaper it was. I think I covered it 1 or 2 episodes ago, and saying that the Muhammad was a great character and something we should all seek to emulate. So it tells you a lot about this weird kind of hard left wing Islamic alliance, right? But here's so that was a paraphrasing of what I said, because again, I was on a roll during that about 5 to 6 minute monologue, and I realize now that I didn't even have my mic off mute. But here is Tony Blair at the World Economic Forum stating explicitly what this is going to be used for. Is it going to track illegal immigration, illegal working, all of this stuff? No. It's going to be used to monitor things like your carbon output. It's going to be used to monitor things like your vaccination status, right? Which, to my great shame, I got caught up in that over the last couple of years, right? Only recently, sort of around 2023, that I recently started seeing the con for what it was, right? Didn't see it because at the time it broke, I was in uni and I wasn't a woke liberal communist, right? I wasn't a woke liberal or communist, but I was asleep, if you will. I was asleep and I didn't understand the game that was going on, didn't understand the power and wealth play that was going on. Now I do. Now I do. Or at least I understand it a lot more. I'm not claiming to know everything, but I understand it a lot more. But this is Tony Blair outright saying, you need the data. You need to know who's vaccinated and who's not. You need to know who's exceeding their carbon allowance and who's not. You need to know, again, I'm adding ones into this now, but I'll give you another example of the individual carbon tracker coming up later. You need to know who said what, because they might have the wrong political opinions. They might not be adhering hard enough to the orthodoxy. They literally say it, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe we should try believing them once in a while.
The technology and the digital infrastructure, I just want to emphasize how important I think that is. Because in the end, you need the data. You need to know who's been vaccinated and who hasn't been. Some of the vaccines that will come on down the line will be multiple. There'll be multiple shots. So you've got to have, for reasons to do with the healthcare more generally, but certainly for a pandemic or for vaccines, you've got to have a proper digital infrastructure, and many countries don't have that. In fact, most countries don't have that. The technology.
Not making the same mistake again. We managed before, didn't we? This is the biggest thing. We managed before. Yes, we live in a more digital age. Yes, we live in a greater age of technological advancement. That's why we have to be so careful on how we use it, right? Yes, we're very lucky to have that and live in this age of technological advancement where the life expectancy is the longest that it's ever been, right? And that many things that would have rendered us, not extinct, but many things that would have been much more threatening, you go back a couple of 100 years, through herd immunity, but also through advancements in medical technology, where we, moved on from bloodletting to actual medicines and such. It is truly something to be grateful for. But now we're seeing exactly how that's been weaponized. Ladies and gentlemen, it's being weaponized against you because you no longer have the choice. You no longer have the autonomy, if you will. For all of the talk of the left, for example, about autonomy, quote-unquote autonomy, over women's bodies and so on, right? So the fact they use it as an impotence to kill children and rob them of their natural body, right? They're awfully big on taking away your autonomy when it comes to personal decisions like vaccines and stuff like that. And that's what this is formulating the groundwork for. If you're not vaccinated, you won't be allowed places. You might not be allowed out of your 15-minute city. You might not even be allowed to use public toilet or whatever. If somebody associates with you and the camera system, right, the facial ID system and the gate tracking system like they have in China, associates you with being unvaccinated like a leper, and somebody associates with you, then their social credit score will go down as well. So you find yourself being more and more isolated and more depressed and like to take your own life and so on. You can see where this then ends up going. You can see how bad it is for people out in China when they get made homeless at the flick of a government switch. Should never be allowed to happen. Should never ever be allowed to happen. But that's what we're sleepwalking into, as the state controls more and more of our homes, as you have compulsory purchase orders in Ireland, where you have to sell your residence to the government, or you have to take in migrants to your home and whatever into your spare room under force, right? Something that should never ever be allowed. But because we now have no mechanism of force, because we now have no ability to band together in any form of militia or anything like that, with our own right to bear arms or anything like that, because the state has the monopoly on force, it's very easy for them to do this kind of stuff. That's why the Americans take that Second Amendment so seriously, ladies and gentlemen. Why they take that Second Amendment so seriously is because the Second Amendment is pretty much what allowed them to get clear from us in the 1700s, right? In 1776. It was the Second Amendment that won them that. They didn't have, obviously the Second Amendment literally came later. It was the idea of the Second Amendment, right, of private gun ownership that allowed them to form militias, that allowed them then to form into the Revolutionary Army, that then allowed them to win the War of Independence and separate from Britain, right? If they'd given over all of their fucking guns, they wouldn't have been able to do that, right? So that's why they care about that Second Amendment so much. That's why we should have cared about that private gun ownership so much and not allowed ourselves to be taken in by the propaganda, right? You see it what happens with school shootings all the time. You see it with the Charlie Kirk assassination. Charlie Kirk, one of the biggest gun ownership, advocates that there was, because he understood this, because he was killed by an assassin, right? Again, people tried to blame the guns, not the deranged lunatic who fucking shot him, right? I don't fall for the propaganda. Any government that wants to take away your guns is not doing it for a good reason. We're learning that now. We are learning that now. The problems even go back before we really gave up big rights to private gun ownership after the Dunblane shooting in Scotland and stuff like that. But now you're seeing exactly when you have no enforcement arm. That's why Andrew Wilson says, for example, rights are force. You only have the rights that you are able to enforce, ladies and gentlemen. And if you don't have something that extends from yourself as a way to enact some kind of serious lethal force, it is a serious deterrent to any kind of criminal activity or government criminal activity and stuff like that, then you are very liable to be taken advantage of in this way by the government, because they then have the monopoly on force. So every single dictator takes away guns from the populace because they know how valuable they are. They know how valuable they are. It's a reason why in Cuba, in Cambodia, in all of these other places, right? They'll disarm the populace the minute they take power, because then they can't revolt against them. And that's what you're seeing now. I did mention, though, ladies and gentlemen, as they mentioned at the World Economic Forum, I'm not sure who this guy is. See if I can quickly find his name. It's a guy that's speaking at the World Economic Forum. And when they say, ladies and gentlemen, they're developing an individual carbon tracker, they absolutely mean it. And I can promise you that. They absolutely mean it. The time has now come, ladies and gentlemen, that we simply need to see what these people are doing. A lot of time, simply believe them, because they mean what they say. Like I said, ladies and gentlemen, just believe them.
We're developing, through technology, an ability for consumers to measure their own carbon footprint. What does that mean? That's where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So, individual carbon footprint tracker. Stay tuned. We don't have it operational yet, but this is something that we're working on.
And then when we refer back to that video we talked about a couple of episodes ago, ladies and gentlemen, where Renee Hodenkamp, I believe her name is, apologies if I'm getting that wrong, said that, hang on, when you exceed your individual carbon allowance, you won't be allowed to buy meat at the tills. When you exceed this, you won't even be allowed to go through the tills, right, if your social credit score is not high enough. Can you now see how the quote-unquote conspiracy theorists and deranged lunatics, right, actually may have a point? Because the people that are in charge of bringing these systems in, the people who have control of our politicians that bring in these legislative changes, are outright saying this. Maybe, just maybe, we should believe them. We should believe them, because we have enough evidence to say, based on how our communities have changed, ladies and gentlemen, to see, oh shit, maybe they actually have a point, right? Maybe they actually have a point. And what you're going to see now, ladies and gentlemen, is nothing short of terrifying, because the music artist Massive Attack displayed how terrifying this can be, put on full display what it would be like to live in China and see it from the government's perspective, right? China, if you don't know, because again, I still have conversations with people and somehow they don't know this, has a camera system which they've invested millions into, as far as I know, hundreds of millions into, that is so sophisticated. They can measure who you are and see who you are without even seeing your face by measuring how you walk. You could be walking away from the camera and it could still tell that it's you by the way that you walk. That's how sophisticated these things are. And then it's linked to the social credit system, which is linked to the central bank, which then as soon as you do the slightest infraction, you get money taken out of your bank account, you get convicted right there and then, so your social credit score goes down, and then you lose all manner of privileges and rights and all of these things. And that's why, again, those people ended up getting homeless at the flick of a government switch. There's a post I'm going to bring up, which when I first recorded this episode, wasn't up on X at the time, but somebody summed this up extremely well, so I want to show you and read that post to you a little bit later. This is a small insight into what that would be like if it was deployed in the UK. See this and understand this is like something straight out of the Matrix, ladies and gentlemen. So you can see it's coming up on screen now. It's got all these binary codes and stuff. Boom. Look at this. You're seeing all these people's faces. These are people in the crowd, ladies and gentlemen. Live tracking their faces in real time. This looks like something straight out of the Matrix or out of some weird sci-fi film, right? Out of some dystopia. This looks like something you see in the 1984 film, right? Now, just imagine, this is at a concert. This is at a music event, right? Seems that it would be relatively harmless. It's like a cool little stunt, right? Now imagine, as I said, this is linked to your bank account and it's linked to a score that you're credited on based on how quote-unquote good of a citizen you are, i.e. how good you adhere to government orthodoxy. Rare insight behind the scenes, this, and I don't even think they realize what they did. It is a cool technology, don't get me wrong, but it's absolutely terrifying. We're seeing how our government will misuse it. All our governments will misuse it. Or rather, use it for the purposes that they want to. And as a result, they're using it for the design that they want. However, one thing that's interesting, as well as people's like Yvette Cooper's perspective on it, right, is how people's tunes have changed. It's how people's tunes have changed towards this now that they're the one wielding the power and wielding the influence over this digital ID, right? And this is the last thing we're going to talk about on this topic today before we move on, given enough of the monologue to it. Should hopefully have given you enough of an idea as to why we should be opposing this as much as possible, and why, as I said before, I'm so tremendously grateful if anybody is able to support me in this way so that I can continue to do this for you. I honestly don't know what else I can do at this point, ladies and gentlemen, because with being as outspoken as I am, with being labelled as a fascist and the Antichrist and all of these things, it's only be a matter of time before what happens with my previous employer happens again if I decide to go somewhere else. Believe me, I'm thinking about it, but I've been terrified of that prospect because, you know, ultimately it would just be me being strong-armed into submission, and I don't want that. I don't want that. So that's why I'd be very grateful if anybody is able to help me out. Not to mention, as I said, it'll be able to scale it and grow it and hopefully get to more people then as well. MPs may have been misled over BAME voter ID claims. Keir Starmer posted something very interesting in, I believe it was January of 2020. So, just before I go over this, this is the post I wanted to bring up. So, somebody by the name of Damien, sorry. I thought I said Dan when I duplicated the tab. No, Damien, sorry. Damien / on X gave a great account of what it will be like to have this digital ID system brought in, right? So, he puts a picture of Tony Blair up on X, and I'll bring the picture up on here now. In fact, I'll bring the post up. I'll bring the post up on full screen for you so you can read it with me and see the picture that he brought up, because it's quite funny. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the post. It says here, we noticed you viewed misinformation on prohibited website x.com. In accordance with His Majesty's government digital ID policy guidelines, the following restrictions have been applied to your Brit credit account pending further review. And then he goes on to say, I just realized the border might have cut some of this off. I'll tell you what, I'll come back to full screen. Never mind. Bug protein credit allowance, negative 25%. Carbon credit allowance, negative 25%. Financial transaction allowance, negative 35%. Data allowance, minus 100%. Travel allowance, minus 65%. NHS waiting list position, minus 90%. A fine of £65 was already charged to your bank account. A further £65 will be charged should the offence occur again within 14 days. To appeal this action, please call the Brit Credit Reconciliation and Appeals Helpline on this number. Please note, due to high volume of calls, waiting times currently exceed 48 hours. That's exactly what it would be like. That's exactly what it would be like. And it even has the British sarcasm in the post, right? So a big cheers to Dan, a big cheers to Damien, Damien Slash. I keep getting Damien and Dan confused for some reason. You can tell it's getting late on this Saturday night. And drowning my sorrows is not going down so well. But anyway, that's exactly what it would be like. So credit to people for taking the piss out of it in these ways and understanding exactly what it would be used for. People in the comments reading it in the voice of Overwatch from Half-Life 2. So again, it is like something out of a video game, like a dystopian post-apocalyptic video game, right? It's truly, truly awful, but it's interesting how people's tunes have changed. A lot of the left are going on at the moment because people on the right's tunes have changed with regards to digital ID. Adam Brooks, I believe it is taking a lot of flack at the moment for taking down one of his posts that he made, I think, about 5 or 6 years ago, campaigning on behalf of digital ID, saying, yes, it's a good thing, it should be implemented, right? Realizing now likely the error of his ways. But what is interesting as well is that it seems the left have flipped on these issues as well. And you can imagine if it was a true right-wing government in power, they would be truly against this for the same reasons that their political opponents are against it now. But interestingly, was that the left, particularly Keir Starmer, was against voter ID in 2020. Now, isn't that interesting? A law, a regulation, which would further help strengthen the integrity of our democratic elections by ensuring that everybody here is at the very least a citizen and has the right to vote. You can argue again, not taking into account the immigration debate and who should have been allowed here to vote, and that, you know, in the past people shouldn't have been allowed here. But at the very least, at this point in time, you can say that if somebody's come here legally, then under the present system that we have, they would be given the right to vote. And that they would be able to very easily get an ID that will prove that, driver's license, passport, whatever. Keir Starmer, in an article posted by The Guardian, MPs may have been misled over BAME voter ID claims, said in July 2020, right, before he was at the reins of power, the government's plans on voter ID risk locking people out of democracy. So he's all about digital ID and digital surveillance now that he's in power. But then when, and again, a lot of the people who are coming here from elsewhere in the world predominantly vote the left, they vote for more welfare state. When it was in his interest not to have IDs around voters and around voter law, he was all happily against it. But now that he's in the reins of power and those same laws would work against him, now he's all for ID and for digital ID and for surveillance and all of these things and for crackdowns, as any good authoritarian would be. So, in The Guardian, it says here, ladies and gentlemen, Electoral Commission data says data that proves voter ID doesn't discriminate against BAME doesn't exist. So it was in reference to this article, which I believe was saying that the data doesn't exist that proves that voter ID laws discriminate against, was it black, Arab, minority, ethnic, I believe is what the term is. I've never really known the acronym. And she knows black and minority ethnic, right? That doesn't exist, because a big argument for the left at the time was that these, and the same was true out in America, was they were saying that, oh, hang on, black people can't get an ID, so they ain't going to be able to vote, so that's why we shouldn't have voter ID laws. Well, some of the most horrifically racist stuff, supposedly coming from the anti-racist side, right? And then when it was in Keir Starmer's benefit to do so, he was saying that, no, these laws are going to lock people out of democracy, right? They're going to lock people out of voting for me, so we shouldn't be doing it. But actually he was quoting an article which, in fact, said the opposite, that the voter ID laws we had in place didn't actually lock anybody out of democracy. So don't be surprised, ladies and gentlemen, when you see the government say that they're doing something, especially this government, say that they're doing something for one reason. If they're trying to make it out, if you're a native British person, Let's incorporate all the distinct ethnicities that are native to the United Kingdom, Great Britain, the British Isles, right? Let's incorporate all of the native identities, native ethnicities within that. They're going to do something which they say is in your favour. They're very, very likely lying. 99.9% they're likely lying. And they're doing something then which is in favour of anybody else that's not that thing. And then for the most part then is going to result in furthering the problems that people are already angry by. It's probably when they're telling the truth. It's probably when they're telling the truth. If you enjoyed that clip, then make sure to go on over to the Voice of the Valleys X page at VOT_Valleys on X. We're also on Instagram at Voice of the Valleys. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, comment, all of that good stuff. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon. Godspeed.